The golden age of Hollywood is often remembered as a period of crystalline clarity. It was an era of definitive boundaries, where heroes were valiant, villains were unmistakable, and the faces projected onto the silver screen were meticulously curated to reflect a specific, idealized version of American identity. Under the watchful eye of the studio system and the moral mandates of the Motion Picture Production Code, the Dream Factory did more than just produce films. It manufactured people. But beneath the Max Factor pancake makeup and the shimmering silk gowns lay a far more complex reality. For decades, the industry operated on a binary of race, white or other. This rigid structure left no room for the nuance of biracial identity. Those who possessed mixed heritage found themselves at a crossroads. They could pass for white and live in a state of perpetual performance, or they could accept being cast as the exotic, the primitive, or the tragic, mulatto. Today, we peel back the layers of this polished mirror. We are going to examine the lives of 20 performers whose mixed heritage was a source of both immense creative power and profound personal sacrifice. Their stories are not merely footnotes in film history. They are a testament to the resilience required to exist in a system designed to erase them. We begin with one of the most successful deceptions in cinematic history. Merle Oberon, the hauntingly beautiful star of Wuthering Heights and The Dark Angel, was marketed as a high-born Australian from Tasmania. Her studio biography spoke of a genteel upbringing in a British colony, a narrative crafted to explain her delicate features and refined accent. In truth, she was born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in Mumbai, India. Her father was an Anglo-Irish foreman, and her mother, Constance Selby, was a woman of Sri Lankan and Maori descent. In the racial hierarchy of British-occupied India, Merle was Anglo-Indian, a group often marginalized by both the colonizers and the colonized. When she arrived in Hollywood, she knew that revealing her South Asian roots would mean the end of her career as a leading lady. With the help of producer Alexander Korda, she fabricated her Tasmanian origin. She lived her life in fear of the sun, using skin-lightening creams and demanding specific lighting to ensure her complexion remained alabaster on screen. She even passed her own mother off as her maid to keep the secret. It was a high-stakes performance that she took to her grave in 1979, leaving behind a legacy of beauty built on a foundation of necessary silence. If Merle Oberon represents the cost of passing, Freddie Washington represents the integrity of refusal. With her fair skin and striking green eyes, Washington possessed the physical attributes that would have allowed her to cross the color line with ease. Born Frederica Carolyn Washington to parents of African American and European descent, she rose to fame in the 1934 masterpiece Imitation of Life. In a cruel irony, she played Piola, a young woman who denies her black mother to live as white. The performance was so convincing that many viewers assumed Washington was doing the same in real life. However, off-screen, Washington was a fierce advocate for racial justice. She refused to deny her blackness, even when studio executives told her she would be a superstar if she simply became white. Because she was too light to play the stereotypical maid roles and too black for leading romantic roles, Hollywood ultimately turned its back on her. She left the industry to co-found the Negro Actors Guild of America, choosing a life of activism over a career built on a lie. The name Boris Karloff evokes images of monsters and macabre shadows. Born William Henry Pratt in London, Karloff spent his career under heavy prosthetic makeup, most notably as Frankenstein's creature. What the public did not know was that Karloff was of Anglo-Indian descent. His father, Edward Pratt, served in the Indian Civil Service, and his mother, Eliza Millard, was the niece of Anna Leonowens. the real-life inspiration for The King and I. Karloff was at least 1/4 Indian, a fact evidenced by his naturally dark complexion, which differed significantly from his siblings. In his early years, Karloff was frequently cast as Arabs or Indians in silent films, his features allowing him to play any Orientalist villain the script demanded. It was only when he adopted a Russian-sounding stage name and found his niche in horror that he was able to transcend the ethnic typecasting that plagued his peers. While he never explicitly hid his heritage, the industry's obsession with his monstrous characters effectively masked the reality of his mixed ancestry. During the escapism of World War II, Universal Pictures found its greatest star in Maria Montez. Known as the Queen of Technicolor, she dazzled audiences in fantasy adventures like Arabian Nights and Cobra Woman. Montez was born in the Dominican Republic. Her father was Spanish, and her mother was a native Dominican woman of mixed Afro-Caribbean and indigenous descent. In Hollywood, this specific vibrant heritage was flattened into a generic exoticism. The studios marketed her as a Latin bombshell, a label that allowed her to be othered enough for fantasy roles, but white enough to lead major productions. Montez leaned into the persona, understanding that in a segregated industry, her value lay in her perceived distance from the American norm. However, this came at a cost. She was never permitted to play a character with her actual Dominican background, remaining instead a permanent citizen of a Hollywood-invented Orient. Perhaps no story better illustrates the studio's power to rewrite reality than that of Aquanetta, the Venezuelan volcano. She starred in 1940s B-movies as jungle priestesses and savage beauties. Universal Pictures claimed she was born Bernu Aquanetta in Ozone, Wyoming, of Arapaho descent. They later pivot to claiming she was Venezuelan. The truth was far simpler. She was Mildred Davenport from Norristown, Pennsylvania. She was a light-skinned African-American woman. The studio fabricated her Latin and indigenous origins because, under the racial codes of the time, a black actress, no matter how light-skinned, could not be marketed as a glamorous leading lady or a romantic interest for white actors. By inventing a new race for her, the studio created a loophole for her beauty to be profitable. Aquanetta eventually grew tired of the facade, but her career remains a haunting example of how the Golden Age commodified racial ambiguity while suppressing black identity. Frank Silvera was known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. In the 1950s and 60s, he was one of the most prolific character actors in Hollywood, playing everything from Mexican detectives and Italian gangsters to Polynesian chiefs. Silvera was born in Jamaica to a white Jewish father and a black mother. He possessed a racial fluidity that allowed him to inhabit any non-white role with uncanny precision, yet this very talent made him invisible. Because he could play any ethnicity, he was rarely cast as his own. He was a man caught between worlds, a classically trained actor who was too ethnic for the lead, but too ambiguous for the supporting black roles of the era. Later in life, Silvera became a mentor and activist, using the wealth he earned from his chameleon roles to fund theater for black artists, ensuring that the next generation wouldn't have to hide behind a mask. At the height of the 1940s, Linda Darnell was the quintessential Fox leading lady, stunning, poised, and seemingly all-American. From A Letter to Three Wives to My Darling Clementine, she was the image of Western beauty. However, Darnell's maternal great-grandfather was Cherokee, and she grew up in a household that acknowledged her indigenous roots. In the high-pressure environment of 20th Century Fox, this was a fact to be managed, not celebrated. While her swarthy features were often noted by critics, the studio carefully curated her image to maintain her status as a white star. Darnell's life was often marked by a sense of isolation. She was a woman whose true identity was whispered about in the shadows, while her public image was used to sell a myth of homogeneous Americanism. In the late 1950s, the exotic began to move from the jungle to the Far East. France Nguyen became an overnight sensation in the film adaptation of South Pacific. Born in Marseille to a French mother and a Vietnamese father, Nguyen's heritage was evident and, for a time, highly profitable. However, the Hollywood of the 1950s viewed her through a very specific lens: the tragic Asian flower. She was consistently cast as the submissive, often doomed lover of white men. Nguyen's biracial identity meant she was often used as a stand-in for the East, a role that denied her the complexity of her European upbringing. Despite her immense talent, she was often passed over for more prominent roles, which were frequently still given to white actresses in yellowface. Her career remains a poignant reminder of the limits placed on Asian and biracial performers during the twilight of the studio system. While France Nguyen represented the tragic side of the era's Asian biracial archetype, Nancy Kwan represented the modern, born in Hong Kong to a Chinese father and a Scottish mother. Kwan became a global icon with the world of Susie Wong. Kwan was one of the few biracial actors of the era whose heritage was openly acknowledged. However, the studio still felt the need to emphasize her Chinese features with makeup to make her more authentic to Western audiences. She was a breakthrough star, yet her roles were often rooted in the prostitute with a heart of gold trope. Kwan's success was a double-edged sword. She opened doors for Asian performers, but she did so by navigating a landscape that still insisted on seeing her as a sexualized other. Her presence on screen was a radical act, even as she was forced to work within a deeply stereotypical framework. Hilda Sims was the toast of Broadway in the 1940s, starring in the all-black production of Anna Lucasta. When she arrived in Hollywood, the industry hit a wall. Sims was of African American and European descent, and like Freddie Washington, she was light-skinned. The paradox of the time was brutal. She was too black to be a white leading lady, but too light for the roles typically reserved for black women. Hollywood's binary could not reconcile her appearance with her identity. She made only a handful of films, most notably The Joe Louis Story, before the industry essentially gave up on her. The tragedy of Hilda Sims is not that she lacked talent, but that she lacked a category. Her career was a victim of a system that would rather ignore a star than redefine its own narrow definitions of race. In an era when most black actors were relegated to the background, Juano Hernandez commanded the screen with a gravitas that could not be ignored. Born in San Juan to a Puerto Rican father and an Afro-Brazilian mother, Hernandez was a powerhouse of the stage and screen. His breakthrough in the 1949 film Intruder in the Dust was revolutionary. He played Lucas Beauchamp, a black man in the Jim Crow South who refuses to show the proper deference to white society. Because of his mixed Caribbean heritage, Hernandez brought a different cultural perspective to his roles, often portraying dignity where the scripts offered stereotypes. He was one of the few actors of color who could command billing alongside white stars in the 1950s. Yet, he still faced the indignity of universal ethnic casting, sometimes being asked to play any character that was simply not white. Hernandez's legacy is one of uncompromising dignity in a town that rarely offered it. The story of Philippa Schuyler is perhaps the most tragic on our list. The daughter of a prominent black journalist and a white Texas heiress, Philippa was a child prodigy, a brilliant pianist and composer who was heralded as the Shirley Temple of Negroes. Her parents viewed her as a genetic experiment, believing that biracial children would naturally be superior. This immense pressure, combined with the reality of American racism, fractured her identity. As she entered adulthood, she found that the classical music world in the U.S. had no place for a black woman, and Hollywood saw her as an anomaly. Disillusioned, she began to travel the world, adopting the name Felipa Montero, and passing as Ibero-American to gain access to stages that were closed to her as a Black American. She spent her life fleeing her own heritage in a desperate attempt to be seen for her talent. She died young, in a helicopter crash in Vietnam, a restless soul who never found a home in the country that birthed her. Rita Hayworth is the ultimate symbol of the studio's whitewashing. Born Margarita Cancino, she was the daughter of a Spanish flamenco dancer and an Irish-American showgirl. When she first appeared on screen, she was a dark-haired, Spanish-looking actress cast in minor ethnic roles. To turn her into a top-tier star, Columbia Pictures embarked on a 2-year transformation. They changed her name to Rita Hayworth, put her on a grueling diet, and most significantly, used painful electrolysis to raise her hairline and broaden her forehead to look more Anglo-Saxon. Her hair was dyed the iconic red that would become her trademark. The margarita was scrubbed away, replaced by the love goddess. While Hayworth became a legend, she famously remarked, "Every man I knew went to bed with Gilda and woke up with me." The me was the woman whose heritage had been surgically and chemically altered to satisfy a white audience's desire for a safe, sanitized beauty. Anthony Quinn was a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Born in Mexico during the Revolution to a Mexican-Indian mother and an Irish-Mexican father, Quinn's life was defined by displacement and reinvention. In Hollywood, his rugged looks and mixed heritage made him the go-to actor for any role that required earthiness. He played Mexicans, Italians, Arabs, Eskimos, and Greeks. He was the first Mexican-American to win an Academy Award, yet he spent much of his career frustrated by the industry's refusal to cast him as a plain American. Quinn used his ambiguity to his advantage, building a career that spanned over 150 films, but he remained a permanent foreigner in the eyes of the studio. His heritage allowed him to bridge cultures, but it also kept him at arm's length from the Hollywood establishment. Dorothy Dandridge was the first African-American woman to be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. Born to parents of mixed African-American, European, and indigenous descent, Dandridge was a woman of ethereal beauty and immense grace. The tragedy of Dandridge's career was the glass ceiling of the 1950s. She had the looks and talent of a Monroe or a Gardner, but her race made her a forbidden object of desire. In Island in the Sun, her character's romance with a white man had to be portrayed without so much as a kiss to satisfy the production code. She was a leading lady who was never allowed to lead a normal cinematic life. The pressure of being a pioneer while being denied the basic opportunities of her white peers took a heavy toll. Her biracial identity made her a crossover star, but Hollywood never truly allowed her to cross over into the equity she deserved. For decades, Carol Channing was the wide-eyed, gravel-voiced sweetheart of Broadway and film, best known for Hello, Dolly and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. She was the image of the eccentric, blonde white star. It wasn't until her autobiography was published in 2002 that the world learned her secret. She was part Black. Her father, a prominent Christian Scientist, was the son of a Black mother and a white father. Channing's mother revealed the secret to her when she was 16, warning her that she might have a Black baby if she married. Channing chose to keep her heritage a secret for over 60 years, fearing that the knowledge would destroy her career in an era that had no room for a Black Dolly Levi. When she finally spoke her truth, she did so with pride, noting that her heritage was the source of her rhythm and her joy. It was a revelation that cast her entire career in a new, reflective light. Lena Horne was the first Black woman to sign a long-term contract with a major studio, MGM. She was of African American, European, and Native American descent, and her beauty was so undeniable that the studio tried to pressure her into passing as Latina. Horne refused. She insisted on being credited as a Black woman. In response, the studio frequently cast her in standalone musical numbers that had no connection to the film's plot. This allowed Southern theater owners to simply snip her scenes out of the movie before screening it for white audiences. Horne's life in Hollywood was one of exquisite isolation. She was a star who couldn't use the same bathrooms as her co-stars, and whose scenes were designed to be disposable. Her mixed heritage made her the perfect black star for a white studio, beautiful enough to attract but safe enough to edit. She eventually left Hollywood for the concert stage, where she could finally control her own image. To the public, Movita Castaneda was the island girl of the 1930s and 40s. She famously starred in Mutiny on the Bounty as the Tahitian love interest. Born on a train crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, Movita was of Mexican Indian descent. In Hollywood, her heritage was generalized into a vague Polynesian or native identity. She spent her career playing characters who were treated as exotic scenery for white adventure stories. Even when she married Marlon Brando, her identity was often flattened by the press into a fiery Latin trope. Movita's career is a testament to how Hollywood used biracial and indigenous performers to lend authenticity to its colonial fantasies, while denying those same performers the right to their own specific cultural history. Herb Jeffries was a man who created his own category. Born to a Sicilian African-American father and an Irish mother, Jeffries had fair skin and blue eyes. He could have passed for white, but he chose to embrace his black identity and become the Bronze Buckaroo. In the late 1930s, Jeffries noticed that black children had no movie heroes who looked like them. He produced and starred in a series of all-black westerns, playing the singing cowboy. Outside of these race films, Jeffries struggled. White audiences were confused by his appearance, and the mainstream studios didn't know how to market a black man who looked like him. Jeffries eventually found success as a jazz singer with Duke Ellington, proving that if Hollywood wouldn't build a stage for a biracial man, he would build one for himself. Finally, we come to Canada Lee. Born Lionel Kanagata, he was of African American and Native American heritage. He was a champion boxer, a brilliant musician, and one of the finest actors of his generation. In Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, Lee played Joe, a role he insisted on stripping of its scripted stereotypes. He was a man of immense integrity who refused to play any part that demeaning to his race. Because of his outspokenness and his mixed heritage, which allowed him a unique perspective on the American dream, he was targeted during the Red Scare. Lee was blacklisted, hounded by the FBI, and denied the right to work. He died of a heart attack at 45, literally broken by the system he had tried so hard to improve. His life remains a somber reminder of the price paid by those who refused to conform to Hollywood's narrow racial mandates. These 20 individuals were more than just actors. They were navigators. They traversed a landscape of color lines, morality codes, and studio contracts that sought to simplify their complex identities into profitable stereotypes. When we watch a classic film today, we must look past the polished surface. We must see the Merle Oberons who were afraid of the sun, the Freddie Washingtons who chose integrity over stardom, and the Rita Hayworths who were remade in a laboratory. The struggle for representation in modern Hollywood, the fight for authentic casting, and diverse narratives is a direct continuation of the quiet battles fought by these performers in the shadows of the Golden Age. By uncovering their true stories, we do more than just correct the historical record. We honor the humanity that the Dream Factory tried so hard to erase. The mirror of Hollywood is finally beginning to reflect the world as it truly is: complex, mixed, and undeniably human. Thank you for joining us in the vault. If you found this history valuable, please like, subscribe, and share these stories. For more deep dives into the hidden history of the silver screen, we'll see you in the next episode.